Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon from Bangkok, from Thailand. Also, good morning and good evening from wherever you are. My name is Mohammad Zakir Hussain. I am working with AIT as a senior program specialist and director of programs. So this is a great pleasure for all of us here from the organizing team for this webinar. Those of you are first time attending this event that we call the AIT Extension Knowledge Sharing Session. Let me just briefly introduce AIT and AIT Extension first before we jump into our webinar. And also, meanwhile, probably we will expect more participants to join in the event. Those of you who have heard or do not know AIT, for you, the information is AIT is an intergovernmental international institute of higher learning located in Thailand, located in 42 kilometers far from Bangkok. It's a place called Pathum Thani, Thailand. And the main mandate for AIT is the graduate education. So what AIT does, since its establishment from 1959, the main mandate for AIT is to offer the graduate education program, which is master's, doctoral, PhD, postdoc, diploma, and all those kinds of education. Having said that, just a little information that AIT doesn't have the undergraduate program. So academically, we have a structure that AIT has 3 schools. Traditionally, in our countries, in the universities, traditional universities, we call them faculties. But in AIT, we have 3 schools: the School of Engineering and Technology, the School of Environment, Resource and Development, and the School of Management. And then we have the AIT Extension, where I belong and I have been working with, and many of my colleagues here from the organizing team are working. And the AIT Extension is basically bringing this webinar to all of you. AIT Extension is literally called the 4th school of AIT, which is basically mandated for non-degree professional training and the capacity building program. So with that, let me welcome you once again to this joint webinar, which is on project management in a disaster context. This is one of our AIT Extension knowledge and experience sharing session. We have a series of this session. We have started since January this year, and this will be continued with many different topics delivered by our in-house expert, AIT experts, and also experts and faculty members and resource person from our networks, which could be the universities or the professional bodies or the government departments. So having said that, I just would like to say a little word about this seminar or the webinar that we are calling Project Management in a Disaster Context. I think this is a very important and a timely one. Probably we all have been hearing about the devastating earthquake that have recently been in Syria and Turkey, and we have heard that there are almost around 50,000 people passed away. So that's probably the disaster thing that we have been bringing within the context of project management, or project management within the context of disaster. I think disaster is nothing new for all of us. People who are joining this session from different countries, we are all familiar with different kinds of disaster. And it could be the drought and the flood, which are very common. I think all of our countries are facing that kind of disaster, but there are also earthquakes, there are also tsunamis, there are also big disaster, and also little disaster, all are happening around us. And then, of course, this project management, which is, of course, the main topic of this. And the project management is an area that AIT and the AIT Extension specifically, we have been working quite a lot. And this is one of our strengths also. At the moment, right now, and also in this month, we have been offering a couple of professional training and capacity building program, and all within the area or within the domain of project management. So it's a very important topic, and project management is a subject or an area, nothing new to us. I think we are all familiar with project management. All of us are having different kinds of experiences, dealing with different kinds of projects. So this is a very interesting webinar where we will not only be hearing about the project management, but mostly the focus will be how the project management should be evolved or adapted when there is a disaster or the post-disaster scenario or situation comes. I think with that, definitely I will be introducing the main key speaker for today's webinar, who will deliver this session. But before going into this, I would like to start with the sequence or telling you the sequence or the flow of this session, how we are going to run this session for all of your information so that you can get a rough idea about this webinar or this online session. We'll start with the official opening speech or opening words from our executive director at the beginning, immediately after me finish this information about flow sequence. And then, of course, we will welcome our main speaker, Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed, and introduce him to all of you, and then allow him to deliver the session. And then after that, we will have the Q&A session at the end. So those of you are having questions and queries, it's about the webinar, it's about the topic, it's about the subject matter, and it's about anything about AIT or about us also. Please feel free to write in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Also, you can raise your hand. Those of you are having that option of raising hand, you can raise your hand at the Q&A session and ask your question. So after the Q&A session is over, then we will go into the concluding part of this session, which will be basically making some concluding remarks from our side, and then of course giving you some more information about forthcoming session and the other activities from the AIT extension, which are coming up from next month and rest of the year, of course. So with that, also let me tell you that this whole session or the whole thing will be happening or will be ending within an hour. We have budgeted for an hour for this session. So that's just probably for all of your information that this session can last 1 hour. If the session might getting more interesting, especially in the Q&A session, it could even go further than that. That is just for your information. So with that, let me stop here and welcome our Executive Director, Mr. Bhoravet Chonlasin, who is actually now taking a class in AIT Conference Center, but it's really a pleasure that he has kindly accepted our request to say a few words and open this webinar. So over to you, Mr. Bhoravet Chonlasin.
Thank you, Dr. Zakir Hussain. Thank you for your introductions, and also thank you for all participants who are coming to this series of the live sessions that organized by AIT Extensions. As Dr. Zakir mentions, we are going to organize this series at least twice a month, and this will be coming in different subject area. Like you can see this time that we are looking at the disaster management, and this is one of the key area that AIT Extension is working on. And there are so many areas that we have to address and be able to transfer the information and knowledge from the scholars and also from the practitioners to all of you, so that we are aware of the current situations. And as Dr. Zakir mentions, climate change, floods, water-related disaster, earthquakes, droughts, and too much water, too less water is very important now. So that's why we bring these topics from one of our important collaborators, partner from Australia, from the University of Newcastle. And we are very glad that Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed can be coming to our live sessions today. And we are looking forward for your participations, looking forward to work more with Dr. Ahmed in the next program and next projects. So let me open this live series sessions for you and you. I hope that you will enjoy these sessions, and thank you for your participation, and stay tuned for our futures live sessions, so that you will be, I am sure that you will be very interested and also having fun from our session. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bhoravet Chonlasin. I think this is the time we go into the main part. Mr. Bhoravet Chonlasin, we know that you are taking a session where we have our respected participants from Pakistan. If they are still having time and willing to join this seminar, they are very much welcome. But of course, if not, we fully understand that there is a class that they have to attend. If they are not, we can actually share the information later on with them, at least a recorded session. Okay, so with that, once again, I'm welcoming to all of you, especially those of you who have joined later, a little bit later than the beginning time of this seminar. Once again, this is a information for all of you that we are going to begin this seminar in few minutes time. If you have any question and queries, please feel free to write into the Q&A or the chat box, Q&A box or the chat box. Or those of you who are having raising hand option, you can also raise your hand in the Q&A. And the Q&A session will be held at the end of the session delivered by Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed, who is our main key resource person today. Okay, with that, let me just introduce our speaker first. May I now welcome Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed to open your... Thank you very much, sir. So this is the time I will spend a few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, just to introduce Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed to all of our participants before I give the floor to Dr. Ifti to begin his session. So Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed is currently an associate professor and also the former program convener of the Master of Disaster Resilience and Sustainable Development program at the University of Newcastle in New South Wales in Australia, where he's teaching policy and social aspects of disaster risk reduction, resilience of the built environment, and sustainable development. He is also doing research, lots of research, of course, and the important research area for him is the post-disaster housing, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and urbanization in the Asia Pacific region. Dr. Iftekhar happened to be originally from Bangladesh, but of course he is an Australian citizen for quite some time. And I must tell you that he has got a very fascinating academic career that I cannot stop actually telling or inform everyone. Dr. Iftekhar has an academic career which is really very attractive for many of us. Dr. Iftekhar has done a Bachelor of Architecture from the Indian Institute of Technology from India. After that, he went for his Master of Science on Architectural Studies from MIT in the US. And then, of course, he did his PhD after that from Oxford Brookes University in the UK. So that's really fascinating academic career, we must tell to everyone. He has done, of course, in his academic career, lots of publications, and that definitely include lots of articles and books. I just would like to inform you that probably he started with his first book, which was on mud architecture from his master's thesis, from his master's period from MIT, which is a very interesting area. And personally, I'm really interested. I don't know if he's going to talk anything about that and relate to this mud architecture to disaster or not, because I'm originally from the northern part of Bangladesh, where we have lots of houses built by mud. And these are not only the small houses, these are 2-story, 3-story houses. So that's a little information also for you, Dr. Iftekhar. Of course, he has probably written many other books, but his latest book that I'd like to tell you that he is the lead author of the latest book that is called Disaster Resilience in South Asia, Tracking the Odds in the Subcontinental Fringe, which was published in 2020. Probably he has many other things to share, but I will request Dr. Iftekhar to speak a little more about him and his work when he's going to begin. Another thing that I like to inform all of you about Dr. Iftekhar, that he's not only in the academic life or academic career, he has spent some time outside academia, and that is also only because he is very much keen and interested about research. So he left academia for some time, and then he worked also outside academia. Like he was with the ADPC. I don't know if you know about it. ADPC is known as Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, which is actually located in Bangkok in Thailand. It used to be within AIT. I think when Dr. Iftekhar was working with ADPC as a project manager and taking care of the disaster risk reduction program in Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. I think that time ADPC was located within AIT. Right now, ADPC has moved out of AIT and located in Bangkok. Dr. Iftekhar has also worked with United Nations Development Program in Bangladesh, and it is a very interesting work that I have noticed from his little information from the university website that I found. He was working as a shelter specialist with UNDP at that time, and as a specialist, he was actually responsible to build 16,000 houses in a post-flood reconstruction program, which is really, really fascinating. So we will be hearing probably more on that. But with this little information, this is my pleasure and a great honor to welcome once again to Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed to be the main person to speak about the topic on project management in a disaster context. So over to you, Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed.
Thank you, Dr. Zakir Hussain, for your very kind and elaborate introduction. I have to say, I should just very quickly share my screen on something else. It's a new book which we edited, which has just come out a couple of weeks ago. If I may share my screen very quickly, I'd just like to show it for 1 minute. And fortunately, this book is free to download. You can buy the hard copy, of course, if you're interested, but if you want the soft copy, you can download it. So this is the book, if you can see it. It's called Resilience and Sustainability in Architecture and Urban Planning. So I will not talk about this book. It's just to show you that this book is available. You can see download book PDF, and so you're more than welcome. And I think this lecture, this session will be recorded, this webinar. So you'll probably be able to get this link, or if you're not, I'm just leaving it on for just a few seconds. We can just note that down. And of course, you can always contact me if you want to find out more information about that. So having said that, given that we have very limited time, I will just launch into my discussion today. And so as Dr. Zakir introduced it, it's basically a project management in disaster context, and I will just kind of move and just tell you a little bit about what I mean. I'm a post-disaster. I will be talking mainly about a post-disaster context. I will also be talking about pre-disaster planning, but a lot of this is the management of projects after disaster. That's what I will be touching on. And so every disaster is different. We have many kinds of disasters in the introductory speeches. Even Dr. Mr. Fawad also mentioned it. And the complex problems. And so we also have a history of mismanagement projects. Ever since one of the largest disasters in this in recent history, the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, there have been many, many projects implemented around the world. You can see the photograph right next to me. These kind of strange houses were built with the belief that these are more earthquake resistant. but they were not culturally appropriate. So, and these projects are also very often not managed by a trained project manager. They're often handled by people working from NGOs and who run into problems. So, which is why I wanted to impress upon you the importance of getting the project management principles right before embarking on these kind of projects. So what are the post-disaster management activities? There are two main activities. One is response and recovery. With response, I will not talk too much about it because the post-disaster response projects are usually handled and sometimes quite effectively by response agencies, including the defense forces, armed forces, and the police in some countries. So, but the recovery is where I think the projects, it takes a long time. And so that is when the projects have to be managed very, very efficiently and professionally. So in this particular case, we are talking about communities affected by a disaster. And now we talk about reconstruction of infrastructure, but also the socioeconomic stability, which includes psychosocial support. It's a combined element. There's a very simple diagram of the disaster management cycle, but of course, I will not discuss that in great detail here, except to say that after disaster, we have the mitigation preparedness, which is before the disaster, and also following the disaster, but after the disaster, we do the response and recovery activities. So very, very quickly, just to summarize. So who's involved in this particular post-disaster situation? Many, many people, many organizations, all that, and they all need to have their specific skills and knowledge, and often it is teamwork. So four main groups is the public, which means the people themselves, the general public, and then the government, which is actually the public sector, and then the private sector, and then the not-for-profit sector, which includes a very large civil society, including small-scale philanthropic clubs, to very large international NGOs. So there are two basic theoretical models. One is the traditional and the professional model in terms of managing disasters. The first one, it's linked to the Cold War period, preparing for very devastating nuclear war, very standard operating procedures led by the defense forces, and the government is in the driving seat, and so on. So that's the traditional model. The new model that has been coming about, and it's increasingly being espoused around the world, is the professional or the comprehensive model. So we try to realize that other than war, of course, there are many, many kinds of hazards. As you can see, the global context is rife with these hazards all over the place. Cold War has ended. Now we need to focus our attention to a wider range of issues, a range of hazards, and so on. And also the standard operating procedures will be there, but perhaps we have to be a bit more flexible. And I'll talk a bit more about flexibility as we go down the road in this discussion. And then, of course, here's this coordination, cooperation, and coordination elements which come into this picture. So the traditional command and control approach, and this is still followed in many, many countries, and unfortunately, even in Turkey to some extent, that is being followed after the recent tragic earthquake. Now, in this particular case, there's fixing up the legal authority, executing the task according to the plan, and this is kind of very much a template-driven kind of approach. And they assume that there's going to be social chaos and breakdown, and people are not going to be able to handle and manage things. And interestingly, we have found that the people are actually the first responders in most cases, and they often assist what they call self-recovery. So that is a resource that we are increasingly recognizing in our field. And also, because of the command and control approach, it is, as a name kind of gives you an idea, that it deviates from the standard deviation from the standard or SOPs, standard operating procedures, may create problems. So it's a kind of more rigid approach. But in the post-disaster environment is actually very complex. It's very uncertain. We don't know how the SOPs will be applied in this kind of context because of the uncertainty. Social structures still operate even though the previous traditional model assumes that they would not, as I mentioned earlier, that the self-recovery process, community-driven response, and all that happens. And also, I think because of this kind of situation, it needs to reassess and deviate from the original plans. You may have a plan, but then in this particular case, because of the situation that has emerged, you may have to deviate from it. And also the organizational environment, even organizations themselves might be impacted by the disaster. So new community and socioeconomic realities, all that will have to be negotiated in bottom of the table. So that actually brings us to the systems-based approach. That actually brings me to the system-based approach is we have to think about a very, very comprehensive, as I mentioned, it's a comprehensive model. So looking at different hazards which may happen together. You may have heavy rain with flooding, followed by landslides, for example. There's just so many examples. And multi-stakeholder relationships. And I mentioned some of the key stakeholders at the beginning, the community or the public, of course, the main stakeholder, but there's the government, there's the private sector, as well as the civil society. And so there's a interrelationship, and also to understand the wicked problems, problems which have not been anticipated before, and problems to which the answers are not evident or easily apparent and applicable. And so in this particular case, the system-based approach taking into consideration a whole range of variables and the relationship of these variables need an adaptive and a flexible way of working. It has to work according to circumstances, the uncertainty posed by a changed situation. And so hence this is the comprehensive approach, and through this comprehensive approach, we realize that all disasters are different. And so we need to address the problem according to the specific type of the disaster, type, scale, impact, etc. And we have to be adaptive, as I mentioned, but it also has to be integrated, integration between different stakeholders, different disciplines, different hazards, for example, has to be systematic. And we should also not assume that there's societal breakdown. And I keep on mentioning this, the community is actually the most important resource. And therefore, there's a need for community-based post-disaster management, and to also allow and understand emergent behavior, new behaviors that have arisen because of the disaster, because of the trauma that followed, because of the social chaos that makes people behave differently. But nevertheless, the community is the essential resource to work with. And so organizations need to reorganize and reevaluate what they're doing according to the situation. I'll just give you an example from Australia, and I'll also give you an example from Asia later. But firstly, let's talk about the Queensland floods in 2010. This was an integrated approach example. So in this particular case, what had happened was that, first of all, there's a whole of government approach taken. And that included the government agencies and the government corporations, as well as non-government agencies, NGOs, and the private sector and the local community. And I mentioned all these stakeholders at the beginning. So that is important. And then what they had done in this case is that they started building up all these different institutional structures. One was the recovery task force, and that kind of looked at the collaboration between the state and the local government. But the local government, in certain countries, they call them municipalities. In Australia, they call them the local councils or local government authorities. And this kind of brings the harmony between local, district, and state levels. And the third one was to establish a specific Queensland Reconstruction Authority. At this moment, even now, you may know that we had massive floods in the last couple of years. And in New South Wales, in Eastern Australia, also Queensland. And so in New South Wales, there's a new New South Wales Reconstruction Authority which has been established, simply because they have to coordinate this recovery and bring harmony across the sector. So basically, it's an established authority, and that is what they did. And they had a certain direction, the leadership. So there was the legal authority who does what. And in countries like Australia, the legal authority was very important. And the authority had to be established across different agencies that they are all obligated to follow the legislation. And all these agencies must fully understand their roles and responsibilities, clear lines of authorities. So all these were done within that Queensland example. And there was also a very strong community focus. And this is the lesson that we do. There's the notion of social capital. including the different values, the norms and skills. So that is what I was going to tell you about, is that, yeah, the community focused community involvement, and this kind of support of the community and their involvement actually leads to self-sustainability. When these projects are handed over to the community, they will be managed and sustained. So I'll just show you a quick video of that recovery process in 2011 in Ipswich in Queensland. You can just see if I can show it.
It was a natural disaster. It knocked down people's homes. It took us all by surprise because no one expected the magnitude. We always was on the belief that after 74 floods that Wivenhoe Dam was there to protect us from any future floods. Well, it didn't happen. You know, there was all the moons and the planets lined up. We had the perfect flood, as they call it, like the perfect storm. We were hit.
The store behind me took in water that actually there's a marker on the right on the post there. So above my head it came. So we lost everything. We managed to get out a few bits and pieces, but it was just the warning came, and you know, within an hour or two at the very most, we had to be out.
The water in this building went well above the ceiling. Everything in here tended to just float around, and it was just a big mess.
From a business point of view, what we made sure is that the businesses had support. That's the key thing. Our economic development officers were available. We went down to help process some of the applications. You know, look, when you've been hit by a flood and you're feeling devastated, the last thing you want to do is fill in government paperwork. We were there to do the red tape. We were there to hold their hand, to let them know that we're going to take them through this journey alone. Just like doing the Kokoda Trail. When you get to the last 30 kilometres and you just don't think you can make it, you need someone just to give you that, you know, supporting shoulder, supporting arm to get you over the line, and that's what we've done.
There was nothing left, so we came, I think it was 2 days later that we could get in to have a look at the damage, and everything that was in the store was damaged, water damaged. So we had to get rid of it all and start again. We got here, we opened the door, we had a bit of a look around inside, and I had a builder with me that was a friend of ours, and he said, right, well, we're here and it all has to go, so we might as well start. And then I'd say no more than 5 minutes later, we were surrounded by about 20 people, all helping us to move all the stuff out. It was amazing, and to this day I don't know some of their names. We were closed for 6 weeks in all. I think I had a couple of days where I thought, poor me, and then I thought, well, that's not going to help. So it was business as usual, and we just sort of pulled together and got on with the job of rebuilding. I think the big thing is accepting help. People, it's not within our makeup to ask for help. It is within our makeup to want to help and to give to people that need help. I'd just say accept all the help that comes to you.
The council have been able to supply us with a lot of new sheeting, and my husband and I have just worked, I think, nearly every weekend, just either pulling down walls, still painting, and still managing to do some repairs. And it's just been a long process. I don't think people realise how long it actually takes. The support is good and everyone's trying to remain positive, but it is, you can still feel it in their voices sometimes that they're still struggling. And so are we, to that degree. You know, we're still not, it's not over.
I think what makes a community, you know, anybody can manage a city during the good times. I think what really is shown during the bad times and during the natural disaster, that we were hit, but we're going to come out a bigger and better city out of this. We're going to come back. That Ipswich spirit will never be dampened by any floods. You're going to see a lot of sunshine here, and you're going to see a lot of people with a lot of community spirit, ready, prepared to take anything on.
Right. Just to give an example of how organizations manage the project together with the community, I'll give you another example from Sri Lanka and another one from India. looking at the post-tsunami lessons. So the first one in Sri Lanka, what the Sri Lankan, many of you probably know about this, is the Sri Lankan government decreed that there would be no reconstruction along the waterfront, and that's initially many thousands of households were resettled, new homes constructed, but without any community consultation, but different from the example I gave before. And in this particular case, houses were happy with the new dwellings, but because they got new houses for few in many cases, but they had problems. They could not grow food there. They could not keep their livestock as they used to be doing. It was far away from the sea, so they couldn't go out fishing. For the fishing communities, they were away from markets because these were greenfield new settlements. They were away from markets, and so basically all these kind of problems started happening. And in this particular case in India, it's the opposite. The community engagement was a success. And in this particular case in Tamil Nadu, this area was Nagapattinam. People were left homeless. And then there was intensive community engagement so that the right kind of development happened and the right kind of livelihoods, particularly fishing, which was the mainstay of this community. So prime land was bought and special channels were built for the communities to continue their fishing livelihood. And this kind of engagement, often in this particular case, as it demonstrated, it causes delays, but eventually there's satisfaction with the project and people could actually go back to their livelihood and they could sustain the project on their own. So I'm just trying to impress upon you the value of community consultation process, project management. And your project management textbooks will not tell you directly about it, but this is the lesson that we have learned from the disaster domain. And also to understand emergent behaviors, we've talked about it. There are new realities for people and new behavior guidelines that emerge. In the Queensland case that I mentioned earlier, there were new camps which were formed after the flood, and people helped each other, they cooked together and they supported each other, there were common kitchens, and so on. The new behaviors, new community behaviors that needs to be recognized. As I mentioned right at the beginning, the community themselves represent a resource. A new kind of groups start emerging. They try to help each other. Even now in Turkey and Syria, you will see that there are many groups that are supporting each other, families supporting each other, community networks that are, that come up. And then the other ideas about effective communication and information management, I will try to go a bit faster because of time constraints, but I think communication is very important. A communication strategy is necessary. And so some of the basic drivers behind effective community strategies, firstly, to understand the audience, and secondly, to understand the cultural, social, and political factors. Thirdly, enjoy participatory communication forums, workshops, etc. And then using different channels for the different audiences. If they are predominantly elderly people, then we use a different mode, for example. And so in this particular case, after the disaster, the damage and risk assessment is very, very important because that is where we start engaging the community in the process. It's not only an expert-driven process. So we look at damage, physical assets, we look at loss, economic flows that change because of the destruction. What are the needs? It has to be right space. What are the basic rights that are being met? Rapid, within 2 weeks, we need to do the needs assessment and damage and needs assessment and risk assessment also if there are future risks, maybe because of aftershocks. The Turkey-Syria earthquake, there's been another aftershock of 6.4 magnitude, just so many days, so many weeks after that. Has to be detailed, and especially the housing sector, which often, particularly in rapid onset disasters like earthquakes, that is more severely impacted. So that is one area which needs a lot of focus and communication with those. So what are the immediate post-disaster activities in this particular case in terms of managing projects? Develop a coordination mechanism, who does what among the different stakeholders that I mentioned, and how the collaboration between the stakeholders can happen to the initial damage and risk assessment, as I also mentioned, and then have a strategy, an outline strategy, and that includes cooperation and action. And then there's a rapid appeal, how to get more money and resources from the governments and international donor agencies including the United Nations flash appeal, for example, emergency relief distribution, which needs to continue for quite some time before people are stable. And then initial shelter programs, very important, from temporary shelter to long-term permanent housing, which may take years in many cases, unfortunately. And then the needs assessment also. And then importantly is the inclusive and consultative community construction. I cannot emphasize this long enough, looking at long-term, and also the decisions that are made, they have to be for risk reduction, basically look at less risk-prone areas, look at different stages of reconstruction that can go to building back better, and so on. So yeah, I will go through it very quickly, look at the different approach. Are we going to provide cash? Is it going to be an owner-driven process? Is it going to be a community-driven process? Will it be agency-driven? Will it be contractor-built housing? A whole range of issues that needs to be done, but this has to be done together in consultation with the community and engagement, of course. So there could be some different approaches that I just started highlighting versus the cash approach. Just give out money to people. This is often very popular and often necessary. Organizations don't like to do it because they're worried that people might use up the money for other things. And there are examples of people having other priorities. The daughter's dowry or someone's funeral also needs money. So that money which is used for recovery and reconstruction naturally get diverted elsewhere. So there's also a need for oversight to manage the cash approach. I can go on a lot about this in different contexts, what has happened, but for the shortage of time, I'll just let you consider this in your own context. Owner-driven reconstruction. So you give them financial support with conditions, but also technical oversight. And that is a slight improvement from the cash approach. And then there's the community-driven reconstruction, that when the community gets the money, but they arrange it through their community organizations. And then finally, there's the agency-driven. Institute, the government or NGO, they get the construction company to build houses and start doing things. And then agency-driven reconstruction in relocated areas, the government and the people who are not involved. That is the example of the Sri Lanka case that I gave you earlier. The government and NGO, they would hire a construction company and they would go, a contractor who would go and build a new site. So there are different approaches we've given you, and you see this table gives you the level of control. As you can see, what is very important, the owner-driven reconstruction, the level of household control is very high. Okay, so that's an assistance, as I mentioned. So just to see how it pans out, I'm giving you a case study from Gujarat 2011 earthquake, Gujarat earthquake. And in this particular case, the highest satisfaction was the owner-driven program, where there was with the government and NGO assistance. So I gave you the example of owner-driven, which provides technical assistance and monetary support, but the people do it all by themselves with private. So that's the highest satisfaction. And the least satisfaction, only 22% to 8% is contractor-built houses and relocated sites. And out of those 3.5%, they consider the quality was inadequate, also all kinds of construction defects. And many of these projects that I myself had done on studies on, we found that people were always blaming the contractors. They were corrupt, discriminatory, poor quality construction, and all. And this kind of corruption is quite evident now in the case of. I'm just bringing this example because it's just fresh right now from Turkey and Syria. Turkey specifically, they have building code, they have professional competency, yet the buildings collapse because of corrupt practices, malpractices, shoddy construction, cutting corners, not following codes, and so on. So. Okay, so I've just given you an overview of the disaster context and what needs to be done in after disaster. But let's look at some of the basic principles of project management very quickly, understanding of technology. In our case, when we are, I talk about built environment, we talk about construction, but it could be overall the project itself. Understanding the concepts of management, very important. Interpersonal skills, things have to be get done, very important. So these are some of the qualities that project managers also need to embody within their work. And also, I think to understand the system, project is an open system, and the system interaction. This whole notion of system, that things are interconnected to a wider range of variables in just a narrow project itself, has to be understood. And and also understand the context and the people for whom this project is intended. So if you look at that, this is a very basic project management. So in this particular diagram, as you can see, a project may start off by initiating it, then planning it, and then preparing, and then it has to be led. But the leadership can run across even right from the beginning, organizing, implementing, controlling it, controlling quality, and controlling the time factor. And then once it's done, evaluating it, and then closing it. So this is a very typical project management stages. And what are the success factors? So there are three main. There's the holy trinity. As you see on one side, there's time, there's cost, and there's quality. And the scope of the project, that defines all those three, the relationship between these three elements. So this is a summary chart, and I've taken it from Kumar, and I've given you the reference from it. That this is really a good book because it's called Effective Project Management, and some of the basic principles of project management, especially for beginners, is laid out very succinctly in this publication. So here you see there are two sides to it. One is the development of the project and then the implementation. And this can go in concurrently in some cases. And I won't go into in great detail, but you find the project and you plan for it and what are the elements that go underneath it. And then there's this implementation side of it, organizing, controlling, and closing. This follows that diagram which I showed you earlier. And then what is important is emotional intelligence. And I will show you a little video clip on what emotional intelligence, but essentially it's a kind of characteristics, knowledge, and behavior and social skills that kind of help effective interpersonal behavior, and also to manage your own, of course, own feelings, and also to correlate them to others' feelings so that there's social cohesion in a group. It's a team. It could be managing the project. It could be the community that people are working with. But the relationships are very, very important in order to achieve this common goal. So this is very important, this emotional intelligence notion. And there are 5 key skills for emotional intelligence. One is effective communication, leadership, and it has to be persuasive, managing conflict between internal conflict and external conflict, and change management, adaptive personality. And you can see that there's a diagram with emotional intelligence and all these elements: better team performance, less occupational stress, improved decision making, increased personal well-being, increased ability, leadership ability. So this is what emotional intelligence kind of signifies. And these skills can be improved and developed in practice. Is firstly to identify individual skills and what their strengths are and the weaknesses are, and then address the gaps and build on the strengths. So I will show you a very quick video clip on emotional intelligence, if I may.
Emotional intelligence refers to the ability to recognize, interpret, and process emotions in yourself and others. While genetics, upbringing, and environment all play a role, there are steps you can take to develop your emotional intelligence over time. Get to know yourself. Emotionally intelligent people are self-aware. They have a realistic appreciation of their strengths and weaknesses and how they come across to others. Peer feedback is one way of improving your self-awareness and may uncover a few of your emotional blind spots. Learn your triggers. Linked to the notion of self-awareness is knowing how you are likely to respond in particular situations. Think about how you felt the last time you were under pressure. Did these feelings help or hinder you? Recognizing emotions and the source of these emotions can shift your emotional state. Empathize. Seeing things from someone else's perspective will help you understand their values and beliefs. This is important when it comes to motivating and engaging others. Make a conscious effort to get to know your colleagues. Ask open questions and actively listen to what they have to say, rather than simply waiting for your turn to speak. Be on the lookout for body language and other non-verbal signs, as these may tell you more than someone is willing to express out loud. Own your emotions. Part of being emotionally intelligent is about taking responsibility for the way you interact with others. If someone upsets you, pause and reflect on why their actions led you to feel this way, instead of reacting impulsively. Recognize that a conversation is a two-way interaction, and it takes two people to make you angry, sad, or frustrated. Go with your gut. Finally, listen to your body. If your stomach starts doing backflips every time you speak to a senior manager, or your muscles tense up before you go into a meeting, what does this tell you? Counterintuitive as it might seem, emotions can be a valuable source of information when making rational decisions at work. Remember, emotional intelligence isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about learning how to recognize, process, and channel them in a way that benefits you and your team. Enhancing your emotional intelligence requires effort, but it can be achieved with sustained practice.
So I wanted to show you that notion of emotional intelligence because I want to connect it to what we were talking about post-disaster project planning, how it relates to it. And so we are looking at open systems, and this is again from the publication by Kumar. It's the open systems. It's basically, we don't want to find the correct solution for the wrong problem. And what Kumar also says, the functional manager uses an analytical approach, while a project manager uses a systems approach. And the systems approach, as I mentioned, it talks about the relationship of variables beyond just the narrow concerns of the project. And so when we look at a project manager's role, it's not only just to execute and deliver a project, it's to align it, strategically deliver projects in alignment with the organization's goals. And there's another publication by Dougal, 2009, which says the boundaries blurred between strategic and tactical. And so identifying the problem is very important, because what Dougal also said is that you might be executing flawlessly, but what if you're executing the wrong things? What good is it? You might be finding a solution to the wrong problem. That is what the issue is. Problem identification provides 90% of the problem solution. This is what is very important. And so bringing it back to our post-disaster project management, what makes it unique? Firstly, it often operates at a much larger scale than other projects. Just look at what the rebuilding in Turkey and Syria entails. The risk, damage and risk assessment hasn't even started. So you can imagine how large the scale of this particular project can be. And this is common around the world. Just this morning, actually, I was interviewed by someone from Reuters in New Zealand, asking about the rebuilding of after the massive floods and Cyclone Gabrielle there. And again, it's such a massive scale, the damage. How long will it take for the recovery? That is what she was asking me. And I said, it will take long. So that is the answer. But of course, that is not a great answer. It will depend on a whole range of factors, and the systems approach would have to be applied, looking at impact. And impact means loss of life. In the Turkey example, the head count is still going up. It's over 40,000 now, 45,000 it seems. And then what is most important is the setting is complex. They started out with, right in the beginning, that the post-disaster situation is complex and uncertain. There are constraints of resources, constraints of supply chain, constraints of procurement, breakdown of communication between individuals, within families. You are ranging from that all the way to institutional communication, government pressure, media pressure. Media is always saying, oh, something has to be done very quickly. But of course, it's not possible to do it because there are all these other constraints which make this kind of project so difficult to initiate and to plan for and then implement. And then there's chaos also, of course, and then there are different system domains and different actors that come in, international actors, global actors as well. So when we compare project management, disaster management, this is from Moore and Narakul. That's another publication, 2006. What you're seeing the project life in a regular project life cycle is the initiation, planning, executing, completing, as I showed you earlier. But in the disaster case, you've started with your prediction of a disaster, if it's possible to predict some disasters. In the case of cyclones and floods, it's often easy to predict and then provide warning, provide emergency relief after the disasters, rehabilitation, reconstruction. And then you see the different timeline before, during, and after. And these are the activities that I told you, very basic activities that cycle mitigation preparedness beforehand, and then also afterwards, and the response and recovery. So the mitigation and preparedness, which we really emphasize on, is proactive. After a disaster, if you do proper mitigation preparedness, the next cycle of the damage and impact will be lessened. So, and the reactive part, of course, is necessary, but it is mainly reactive. We would have to look for something a bit more permanent, preventative. So in this particular case, I'm just giving you a very, very quick example. Again, from Sri Lanka, this is based on a study by Buckley, based on the water and sanitation projects for World Vision in Australia. So we know about the damage in Sri Lanka, and national assistance came in. And so in this particular case, the scope, and there's a water project. The scope was in Batticaloa district. And so there were 16, in this case, camps and communities, 4,500 people. So this is the scope of the project. And you can see already it's a very large scope. And then the water projects and sanitation project, and then those shelter projects as well. So this was the scope. And within that, there were issues like communication management. There were three main languages, Sinhala, Tamil, and English, and with local dialects as well. And so this depended on the different contexts, and so different NGOs came in also. This is what is happening with the communications, all these international people coming in. And so this presented major communication challenges, and the solution, the emergent solution in this particular case. And you see, this is quite different from a regular project. Even within a regular project, some of these elements may have been there, but they get exacerbated because of the uncertain situation that has emerged. So the solution was that they followed written communication and using English as the base language, and then including time and misinterpretation factors within it, because English is, of course, not the native language there, even though people are proficient in it. So what are the lessons? Scope management. The project was huge, so assessment prioritization of scope was required, but also it was immediate. The needs were immediate. So there were too many number one priority tasks that had to be undertaken with very, very limited resources. And so scope management, it became very, very important to balance between time, quality, and risk assessment, these three elements. And also it's up to the individual project manager. And they don't have a review before because it's a new situation. And so all that would have to be done on the spot and managed in this kind of situation. Time management, of course, in contrast to too much scope, there was too little time. And the emergency relief that was provided with the medium to long-term requirements, they required the project development as soon as possible. As now in the case of Turkey and Syria, quality management. And so eventually compromises had to be made, which was necessary to get things moving. So at this time, 70% solution was better than 100% solution later. And then, so toilet facilities were very important, and so on. I'm just giving you the different challenges and how they were considered in managing this project, because this management had balance between scope, time, and quality. And then the formal risk assessment often not undertaken. It was just using common sense and professional judgment because things have to be done very, very soon and very, very quickly. And then there's the cost and resource management issue. So there are four main phases within that. You look at resource planning, cost estimating, cost budgeting, and cost control. This is the typical way of doing things. But again, this has to be blended and in a more flexible manner and handled in that in an adaptive manner after disaster. And there's often a lot of international money coming in. A normal project, it's not like a normal project, they may have a lot of money. But even if they had a lot of money in the Sri Lankan case, they could not overcome the time and scope constraints, because even though they had too much money, they didn't have enough material, they didn't have enough resources. And this was the case even in the New Zealand example that I mentioned at this moment, that they might have money, it's a relatively affluent country, but where do you access the materials from? The material supply comes from overseas. With the ongoing war in Ukraine, those material supply chains have been disrupted. Where are the people who will be doing things, human resources, the labor shortage as well because of control on migration and so on. And the migration was controlled because of COVID as well, and all kinds of things came into play. So there are bigger factors. And again, that is why I talk about the systems approach. And prices also go up. Inflation currently, because of the Ukraine war, prices everywhere, as you may know from your own countries, have just spiraled. And so how do you actually manage a disaster project after in such a situation? Other challenges, so human resource management, contract procurement, etc., government coordination, all that. So I won't go into them in great detail, but what are the implications? What are the consequences of these inadequate plans? Basically, we get 10 critical success factors that are taken again from Mo and Patna Nakul. Firstly, effective institutional arrangements have to be in place or established. Coordination, collaboration, very important. Supportive laws and regulations. We cannot do things just out of the legal system. And that was also demonstrated by the Queensland example I gave you. Information management, competencies of project managers and teams, they have to be trained in proper project management, but then have to be adaptive and have the element of emotional intelligence within them. Consultation and engagement of stakeholders, communication mechanism, define goals and commitments, and logistics management, and sufficient mobilization, disbursement of resources. So that is what it is. So in this particular case, in the disaster situation, greater flexibility, we have to understand the contingencies that arise, better communication strategies, better engagement of stakeholders, better collaboration, better knowledge transfer. All these elements have to be brought into focus. And planning is the major project management stage. Now I finally come to planning, that we know that after disasters this may happen. If an area has been impacted by a repeated disaster, then the planning stage is the most important stage. And when we plan for the unexpected, we have to plan for the expected, more importantly, both expected and unexpected. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much for the time, and I'm open to any questions and discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Iftikhar. It was really wonderful and really fascinating to hear everything that actually we wanted to hear probably. And I think it would be very difficult for me to come up with any questions, because I have been, trying to think about different aspects. But later on, I found that you have covered everything, and almost nothing is left out that is coming from my mind. But let me, as I promised, let me just check if there is any question, because this is the time for Q&A from our participants. So participants, if you are there, I have been writing messages, which probably has also interrupted Professor Ifti. Sorry for that. If you have any queries, please, you can raise your hand, or you can write in the Q&A box or in the chat box. I do not see any question so far. Yes.
Either they're happy with it or not very happy.
There is a person who has raised his hands. So my colleague, could you please unmute Mr. Ayush? And
yes, yes, I'm unmuted.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, thank you, Dr. Ifti, for the wonderful presentation. Actually, I've heard Dr. Ifti present about post-disaster reconstruction or recovery context previously as well. I used to work with NSET. I think Dr. Ifti knows NSET in Nepal, and I worked in the post-disaster recovery in Nepal as well. And I'm currently a master's student in disaster preparedness here in AIT right now. Dr. Ifte, I had a question with regards to what you explained earlier, and also with regards to the recent Turkey earthquake and the earthquake risk we face in Nepal as well. What do you think about the resources or the funds that go into pre-disaster preparedness and risk mitigation when it comes to earthquakes and the post-disaster? Because a lot of funds actually go into post-disaster reconstruction. We had a lot of international support for Nepal as well, and there's a lot of international support pouring in for Turkey and Syria as well now. But why is the international support not as much when it comes to pre-disaster risk mitigation, especially for earthquakes?
This is a great question, Mr. Ayush. I think that is actually my quandary as well. I can talk about this in great detail. Just to say, even here in Australia, that is a basic problem. See, when we talk to, I told you about the structure here with the local councils. When we talk to a local councillor, we ask them that, why don't you build back better? You're getting these floods repeatedly. We had 5 floods in a couple of years. They say that the federal government allocation is only for disaster response, not for risk reduction or resilience. And so we end up in building the same level that so it's asset replacement. If we fix up the roads, fix them to the same standard as before, not fix them up better. If we rebuild the bridge, we just replace the old bridge, which has been damaged, with a new one. So there's actually very little investment for that. And this actually happens even at the global level. You're talking about Nepal, right? What happened after Nepal? Like, there was a big earthquake, 2015 earthquake, the Gorkha earthquake. There was so much money going in. Has that been actually spent on building back better? Has that actually percolated down to improve building codes? Perhaps no. In our research on Nepal, we saw that out of 24 municipalities, only 3 were voluntarily using the new building codes, and rest of them, yes and no. And so, and we know that Nepal is a seismically active area. There might be a new disaster. After is also before the next one. So yes, you're very right to question it, and this is my question. The problem is that when you actually invest in risk reduction and resilience, you cannot demonstrate any kind of measure. So when there are donor agencies, they want to see measurable outputs. We built 500,000 houses, we repaired 20,000 bridges, and so on. So those are measurable outcomes. We spend the money, we got the bang for our buck. Okay, but for resilience building, they cannot measure it. We improve the bridges, build the houses, there's no disaster after that, so what? Only if there is one, then one can demonstrate that, look, these houses, these buildings, these doors, they have withstood new disaster because of building back better. So that demonstration capacity is unfortunately dependent on another disaster happening. So it's a very, very difficult problem. Not that it didn't happen in other places. Again, giving you the example of Queensland. Queensland, for example, is one of the states which has a very enlightened governance compared to many of the other states in Australia. So what had happened is that there was a massive cyclone in 2006, Cyclone Larry, and all the building codes were updated for wind resistance. And they had implemented those building codes in all the new buildings in the reconstruction. So when the next cycle of the cyclone happened, 2011 Cyclone Yasi, as you can see, there was all this flooding because of the storm surge. But the houses didn't fly off. The roofs were still intact simply because they followed the building codes. So they could demonstrate that investment in, it's not only the money allocation, but also the legislation structure and the building codes, for example, but also the protocols for doing everything. Economic recovery has to be built in better, for better livelihoods, and so on. So I think that is an important message. I hope I answered your question right.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayush. Thank you. So I would like to check once again if any other participant have any more questions to Dr. Iftekhar. If not, then probably I have one question to Dr. Iftekhar. It's a very kind of a layman question. Dr. Iftekhar, we are talking about project management in the disaster context, and I think you have nicely elaborated and explained all the things that we need to know in this area. But my question is, let's say when a disaster happened and there is an ongoing project, we lost money and we lost time, sometimes even the human resources. So in that kind of cases, like what is your suggestion or what kind of things that we should do as a project manager?
That is actually very true, and this is exactly what happens. And just that little video I showed you from Queensland, you saw all those businesses, their day-to-day business got disrupted. It's not a project, but and so they have to stop their business. And the moment they stop their business, their income stream, their revenue diminishes. And so there's that economic loss, and they have to go back to their previous state in order. And the faster you do the recovery, the better it is. In the case of projects also, that is the same case. The quicker you manage to recover, the less economic loss that you're going to do. Remember that after a disaster, there are two things that happen. One is your damage, which is unrecoverable. The building is destroyed, is gone, it's finished. You can't recover it, you rebuild a new one. So that's a complete investment. The other one is because of your project, as you mentioned, your businesses, enterprises, they get disrupted and you encounter a loss in revenue because of the time. The longer it goes, the more the loss accumulates and eventually compounds itself. So the faster you can do the recovery process and get them back on track, the better it is. And remember, in this particular case, I think some compromises may need to be made. Let's do 50%, let's do 60%, instead of waiting for resources to be going back to 100% as before, because the situation may not permit you to go back to 100% in the short term. But yeah, so that is perhaps one of the approaches. Again, I would talk about flexibility, but it's important to get back on the feet as quickly as possible. It's easy to say, hard to harness resources at that time. But again, this also relies on your project planning. If you have a project and you know that there might be a disaster, you are in an area which is seismically active, you're in an area that's been flooded on a regular basis, you're close to a hill that might have a landslide, and so many other issues that we know. If we have done the risk assessment, then we build it into our long-term contingency plan so that we can recover ASAP because we have built into it. We have a little amount of money set aside for that. We just keep it. That is our savings account for the contingency. So every time there's a disaster with the project gets derailed, we can dip into that little pocket and use that money to do whatever 50, 20% so that we can keep going and avoid the loss of revenue, economic loss.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. My second and probably the last question is, I think you have mentioned about the different approaches in the post-disaster management context. And you have put a lot of emphasis on system approach or systems thinking. Because we are working in the field of academia, we do curriculum development and design lots of training programs in the field of project management, and that can be project management for different sectors or any sectors. And I have seen about, of course, there are lots of things that you have mentioned, like emotional intelligence and the system approach, but it is not really well integrated into the curriculum. So do you think that we should really put an emphasis on bringing this kind of topic in the curriculum?
Yes, I think it is very important. The systems approach, and there's now a lot of literature on the systems approach. In my particular course, in my undergraduate program, we have a course on disaster resilience and management of the built environment. And we have a whole session on the systems approach. And we actually get the students to work on a systems problem, to understand and recognize the systems and the subsystems and the boundaries of those systems, so they can actually work. So I think it is very important to incorporate the systems approach so that it actually helps you be prepared. Remember the question you asked about the project. When you have your systems approach, then you think long-term also, that what can happen within that system. Our boundary is the regular day-to-day functioning of that project. But the other system is the uncertainties, the disaster that might happen. Let's also take that into consideration and have a contingency plan for it. So a system, of course, is a very, very broad concept, and we may have to call the boundaries at a certain point, and defining those boundaries is also very important in understanding the system approach. And how far can you go before we realize that we simply don't have resources and the time to manage a complete, holistic, and comprehensive and integrated systems approach.
Thank you, sir.
So it's important. I think I would encourage any kind of, initiative to incorporate the systems approach within all kinds of curricula.
Thank you very much. So I think that is probably the end of Q&A session. So just to repeat the things that I was just mentioning in this webinar, Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed has really elaborated the topic and the subject matter. Basically, he has gone through, or he has presented all the different approaches that is probably required for the project management in a disaster context. He has given examples from different countries, including Sri Lanka, India, Australia, New Zealand, and starting from 2005-6 until the recent the Turkey's and Syria's cases as well, including the war that is happening in Ukraine. So thank you very, very much for bringing all the things within the things that can actually be considered as disaster for all the project managers, which could be coming in one time or another time in their project period. I think you have also required that what are the skills and the knowledge probably we need to be able to be a good project manager, so that you can be able to handle your project during the disaster context. Emotional intelligence you have mentioned, you have put a lot of emphasis on the planning, which is definitely is a very important thing, the planning, and then you can only go for implementation. I think that's also include the designing of the project, and you have rightly mentioned about the very important thing, which is the system approach or system-based approach that we probably need to put into this. So with that, I think this is the end of our webinar. I have just few things to communicate with all of our participants. So participants, you have heard at the beginning from our executive director and from myself that this is a joint event with University of Newcastle and AIT, or AIT Extension from AIT. And we are very fortunate to have Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed to kindly deliver this, come forward and deliver this session. As I was mentioning, that we will have a lot of events. These are the knowledge sharing events from AIT Extension, which are basically the pre-events. So all of you are encouraged to actually keep an eye on our social media sites and also in our websites. You will get the announcement. Also, those who have actually registered, you will also receive the information by email as well. Just all of your information, I would like to add one thing that we will have Dr. Iftekhar Ahmed at AIT, I think very soon, within 3 months. He will be here for probably teaching and doing some research. And we are also having probably an opportunity to work with him at that time to design some course curricula at that time for the training things. Because Dr. Iftekhar, as I was mentioning at the beginning, he has an extensive experiences working outside the academic world, outside teaching, basically, I would say. And during his work with UNDP and during his work with ADPC, he has also developed many interesting training curricula. So we will be using his knowledge and, of course, the updated knowledge during his time in AIT, and to come forward probably a couple of training courses and also revising some of our existing training courses. So we'll take that opportunity. So you will be, of course, getting that information as well. I think with that, once again, I'd like to remind you that this session is the 3rd session in this year, the session that we are calling AIT Extension knowledge and experience sharing session. We will have probably twice a month this kind of event, and the event will include many different topics. That is starting from, of course, project management, information technology, geoinformatics, engineering related topics or topics that fall within engineering areas. There will be topics that is called under the energy sector. There will be interesting topics that can fall within this area called public administration and public policy. So please keep an eye on that and keep in touch with us for any kind of need that can be considered as a professional training and capacity building. You can feel free to write to any of us or communicate through by email or the social media. So thank you very, very much. With that, I also like to convey our sincere thanks and gratitude to all my colleagues who are behind this webinar arrangement, starting from Kun Littakant, who is actually from our production and marketing unit. There is Kun Hem is there, Dr. Pallavi is there. We have our coordinator, Mr. Anisur Rahman, who was who has actually started coordinating this program, but right now he's in Vietnam for one of our training program. Of course, we like to extend our sincere gratitude and thanks to our executive director, Mr. Horavet Chonlasin, my senior colleagues, Ms. Narumon Wannai, and other colleagues who are many. I cannot actually include all of their names here. It will take a lot of time. So thank you very, very much to all my colleagues. And once again, thank you very much, Dr. Iftikhar. We look forward to keep in touch, and we look forward to have you in AIT very soon. And once again, thank you very much to all of our participants. Have a wonderful day ahead or night, wherever you are. So
thank you.
that's the ending of this webinar. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.